really exciting guest on our show tonight. We have Michael Brozzetti, who's the CEO of Boundless LLC, who's going to help us address fraud, right?
Fraud.
Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Tammy. Carl.
Welcome aboard.
To the
Pleasure to be
So tell us about Boundless LLC. It's not like Outward Bound. It's something different?
We're an internal audit risk and advisory firm helping companies improve the quality of their internal audit functions, as well as training and certifying internal auditors within corporations.
Okay. So is that...
What's that mean? You're trying to find where they're being bad in a company?
Essentially, yes, Carl. We talked earlier about when you make an investment decision, you look at the sort of the prospect of an industry, perhaps. But some of the things that have been born to light are the quality of management and exactly who are these people behind the scenes making the strategic decisions regarding the future health and prosperity of the company.
And is that private companies, public companies, both?
Right now, the reform efforts within the public market sector. I think some of the notions and principles we'll talk about tonight regarding internal audit are certainly applicable to private corporations, and it's a lot of the underpinning principles can help a board of a private company, management of a private company, just as it would within the public company arena.
And is that because of Sarbanes-Oxley? Is that what drives a lot of your...
It's a great question. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act actually has somewhere in the neighborhood of 29,000 words, and the only time you see internal auditing appear is with respects to the public accounting firms, the external auditors, being prohibited in performing outsourced internal audit activities, which, as we all know, got Enron in a lot of trouble, playing both sides of the fence there.
And how did you get into this profession?
I'm pleased to say that when I graduated from the University of Delaware, I had a very lucrative offer from one of the big public accounting firms, and really got a great experience. Really kind of gave me the perspective of the public accounting firms, their view on risk management, their view of audit in general, and right about the Sarbanes-Oxley boom, 2002, I had moved into an internal audit capacity, and ultimately he started my own company at about 2005.
Okay. Okay, great.
You saw the opportunity in the law change primarily, and that's what...
I saw an opportunity to help internal audit really become more of an intelligence source for the board and for management to support strategic and operational decisions.
So does the board normally hire you? Or does the CEO hire you, or who typically makes the purchase decision?
It should be the audit committee. Now,
audit committee of the board.
Audit committee of the board of directors. Now, if you're a statutory board in the public company sector, you're required to have an audit function according to New York Stock Exchange rule, as well as an audit committee. And ideally, to maintain that independence of the chief audit executive, if you will, the hire decision, the comp decisions, as well as the fire decisions should reside within that independent audit committee on the statutory board.
What about nonprofits? Do you also work with nonprofits?
There's not as rigid of requirements around internal audit, but I think when you look at the organizational problems that surface, they're the same.
Right.
Corruption,
in
fraud.
a way, sometimes they're more prevalent.
It might be more prevalent. Yeah.
Well, whether it's profit or surplus, it's money.
Yeah.
Right, and where there's money, there's the temptation for corruption, for fraud, and misuse of funds.
I think structurally there might be they're typically probably not up to the corporate level as far as their internal controls too, right?
Generally, I think you'll find, if you're not prodded to do it, you don't. Oftentimes is viewed as a cost. I think what boards and the C-suite need to think about is, again, how do you create internal audit to be a strategic intelligence source to really make sure you're validating the truth value of information that management is telling the board.
Right.
A lot of the issues are stem from what you're saying and what you're prophesizing.
And how it's spun.
Right, is not in fact what's happening internally. So without that check and balance system, it's really difficult, I think, for a board and management for that matter, to be in tune with what's happening internally.
So, you want to? I was going to say, so where was all this over the last 3 years of the financial crisis?
It's a great question, and I think we need to kind of look
I
at
wasn't going to ask that.
You weren't going to ask that? I'm sorry.
That's okay.
where were the internal auditors during the financial crisis. I'm still wondering myself, but to give you a little context, I think we have to look at both sides of the coin. Let's look at it from the shareholder perspective. Shareholders want to know, are risks identified, are mechanisms in place for risks to be identified and contained? And these enterprise risks we can simply state as potential for corruption, for fraud, for flat-out poor management. Poor management is an early warning sign for process breakdowns, breakdowns in communication gaps, all the things that ultimately will make an organization inefficient. And if you boil it down to the micro enterprise risk level, you'll really find that you have to look at the corporate culture, the ethical undertones. You have to look at, sometimes there's bad board selection or management selection going on within an organization. Sometimes it's just related to poor strategic decision making or poor operational decision making.
Do you also audit whether the board is truly independent or if they're just appointed by the CEO because he knows that they're going to go along with what he says?
It's a great question, and in theory, the board is not immune to internal auditing. And it's funny because I asked that question to Paul Washington, who is the corporate secretary for Time Warner, on an NACD call early in February. It was a webinar, and that was his view. They're not immune to internal auditing. Those types of checks and balances, review of charters, review of authority, are certainly in the realm of internal audit, and really make sense to make sure that the risk information that is being delivered to the board really is carrying out the mission and the responsibilities of the board, the charters of the board, as well as the charters of the C-suite.
Now, there's been an increase because of our negative economic situation of a lot of burglaries and robberies. I would think that as a result there'd be more fraudulent activity also going on within public companies just because profit margins are lower, revenues are less, costs are still high.
Yeah.
Have you found that to be the case?
Well, I think you bring up a good point, and I think the thing to note is there's an increase of pressure. We have people that are fearful of losing their jobs. We have very high pressure situations for making numbers, hitting targets, and I think we can't be naive, and we have to realize that human nature will sometimes drive management to do whatever it takes to hit their numbers. And low level down the organization, it could be theft of cash if you're a retail operation. But you also have to consider what's happening up at the management level and the C-suite level regarding these pressures and these fears and how are they being dealt with. I don't think we saw Ken Lay stealing cash out of the cash register.
Right.
So I think we have to look at the risk of fraud and the potential for it throughout all levels of the organization and not be naive and press it too far down.
Just too far down.
You can't depend on an internal whistleblower either. You got to have a process in place where this stuff will, at least from
true.
I was going to ask that question. Do you set up a whistleblowing line as part of the internal
Well, from
audit?
a statutory perspective, you have to have one. I think Sarbanes-Oxley was a well-intended piece of legislation. I think there's a lot of controversy over whether or not it was swatting a fly with a sledgehammer, so to speak. And
it was.
the data points will suggest that most frauds, majority of them, are identified through whistleblower hotlines. I think the bigger question is, and the questions internal audit can be asking, is are employees aware of the whistleblower hotline? Do they have programs in place that'll protect an employee from retaliation? It really can be a lead source, but as an entrepreneur, I can tell you an internal audit function needs to market the use of that line to reap the benefits from it. But it can certainly be a big part of an enterprise risk management program that ultimately will benefit the organization and the organization's stakeholders.